Picture this. It's January 1946 and a cold morning in South London. Your mum shakes you awake before dawn, tells you to get dressed quickly and wear your warmest coat. You stumble downstairs confused, and she's already at the door with her shopping bag and your ration book clutched in her hand. She feels you are going to the greengrocer's, but there's something in her voice, an excitement you haven't heard in years. You walk through streets still showing bomb damage, past houses with boarded-up windows and gaps where buildings used to stand, and when you turn the corner onto the high street, you stop dead. There's a queue stretching down the entire street. Hundreds of people are wrapped in coats and scarves, stamping their feet against the cold, with their breath making clouds in the frozen air. But they are all waiting for the same thing, a banana. Not bananas, one banana. This is the story of the arrival that made headlines, and the moment an entire generation discovered that yes, we did have bananas again. But to understand why people would queue for hours in the freezing cold for a single piece of fruit, you need to understand what came before. In 1940, with the war intensifying and German U-boats prowling the Atlantic, the British government made a decision that seemed logical at the time but would echo through the decade. They banned the import of bananas completely. This was because refrigerated cargo ships were desperately needed for the war effort. These ships could carry troops, weapons, medical supplies, ammunition, and all the things that would help win the war. Bananas, the government decided, were a luxury, non-essential. Britain could survive without them. And survive we did, but not without loss. From 1940 to 1945, bananas simply ceased to exist in Britain because the ships stopped coming. The docks that had once unloaded crates of green bananas to ripen in warehouses stood empty. The fruit that had been affordable, a regular sight in every greengrocer's shop and market stall, vanished as completely as if it had never existed. For adults who remembered them, it was just another wartime sacrifice, another thing to miss along with butter, sugar, meat, and decent tea. But for children born during the war, bananas were mythology. They were something parents talked about, something that existed in picture books and memories, but not in reality. An entire generation grew up never having seen, touched, or tasted a banana. The cultural impact was immediate and strange. Comedians made jokes about bananas, or rather about their absence. An old music hall song, "Yes, We Have No Bananas," became an anthem of sorts, sung with ironic cheerfulness in pubs and on the wireless. The lyrics captured the wartime shortages with perfect British gallows humor. If you couldn't laugh about it, you'd cry, and crying wouldn't bring the bananas back. So people laughed, sang the song, and carried on with the grim business of surviving, rationing, blackouts, and the constant threat of bombing. But mothers are nothing if not resourceful. If their children couldn't have real bananas, they'd make fake ones. The recipe appeared in magazines and newspapers, passed from neighbor to neighbor, written in the backs of ration books, mock banana. The instructions were simple but depressing. Take a parsnip, boil it until soft, mash it thoroughly, add a few drops of banana essence if you can find it, mix in whatever sugar you could spare from your ration, and shape it into something vaguely banana-like. The result was a pale, grainy, sweet paste that bore no resemblance whatsoever to an actual banana, but was the best anyone could do. Children ate mock banana and believed it was real because they had nothing to compare it to. Parents would serve it with a kind of desperate optimism, telling their kids that this was what bananas tasted like, that this was the treat everyone had been talking about, and the children, bless them, accepted it because they didn't know any better. Only later would they realize they'd been eating sweetened parsnip and calling it exotic fruit. But in the moment, mock banana was better than nothing. It was hope mashed up with root vegetables and served on a plate. The war ended in May 1945. VE Day brought celebrations, street parties, and a sense that the nightmare was finally over. But the bananas didn't come back immediately. The ships were still being repurposed. The supply chains were broken. The colonies and territories that grew bananas were still recovering from their own wartime disruptions. Months passed. Summer turned to autumn, autumn to winter. And still no bananas. People began to wonder if they'd ever return. If perhaps the war had changed things so fundamentally that certain luxuries were gone forever. And then came December 30th, 1945, a date that would be remembered and celebrated. A cargo ship that had been carrying during the war docked at Tilbury docks on the Thames estuary, and in its refrigerated hold, carefully packed and monitored throughout the journey from the Canary Islands, were 10 million bananas. 10 million. It was the first commercial shipment to reach Britain in over 5 years. The ship's arrival wasn't just logged and processed, it was treated as a national event. Reporters were dispatched, newsreel cameras were set up at the docks, Pete News filmed the first crate being unloaded, the dockers handling the fruit with exaggerated care as if they were made of glass, officials from the Ministry of Food standing by to supervise. The footage is remarkable to watch now. Men in suits and overcoats, breath steaming in the winter air. Watch as wooden crates are lifted from the ship's hold by cranes and carefully lowered onto the dock. The crates are opened and bananas, still green, are displayed for the cameras. The newsreel announcer's voice declares that the banana is back, with the kind of gravitas usually reserved for royal births or military victories. And in a way, it was a victory. The banana boats were coming home, the Atlantic was safe again, but there was a catch. There's always a catch. The government, still operating in wartime mode despite the war being over, immediately imposed restrictions. The first batches of bananas would be reserved exclusively for children under the age of 18. Adults were banned from buying them. To purchase a banana, you needed to present a child's ration book as proof. The logic was that children had suffered most from the absence, that an entire generation had grown up without experiencing this basic fruit, and they deserved priority. Fair enough, perhaps, but it created a black market almost immediately. Adults desperate for a taste offered ridiculous sums. Some parents borrowed their children's ration books to buy extra. The black marketeers who'd thrived during the war added bananas to their inventory, alongside nylon stockings and whiskey. The bananas didn't hit the shops immediately, they had to ripen. They were stored in warehouses where the temperature and humidity were carefully controlled, where men whose jobs had vanished during the war were rehired as banana ripeners, checking the fruit daily, waiting for that perfect moment when green turned to yellow. It took weeks, and during those weeks, anticipation built. Newspapers ran articles about the coming arrival. Parents told their children to be patient, that soon they'd taste something magical. Schools prepared lessons about where bananas came from, how they grew, and what they looked like. It was as if the entire nation was holding its breath. Early January 1946, the bananas finally reached the shops. And if you thought rationing queues were bad, the banana queues were something else entirely. People arrived before dawn, setting up camp outside greengrocers and market stalls, wrapped in every coat and blanket they owned because January 1946 was bitterly cold. The war might have been over, but the winter didn't care. You'd stand there in the dark, stamping your feet, hands shoved deep in pockets, watching your breath condense, and you'd wait. Hours, sometimes 3, 4, 5 hours, just for the shop to open, just for your chance to buy one banana per child. The queues stretched down streets, around corners, blocking pavements. Traffic had to navigate around them. Policemen were stationed at some shops to keep order because tensions ran high. People had been deprived for so long that the prospect of missing out, of queuing for hours, only to have the shop run out before you reached the counter, was unbearable. Arguments broke out. Queue jumping was met with outrage. The British might be famous for queuing patiently, but there are limits, and bananas apparently tested those limits. Mothers stood in those queues, clutching their children's ration books, often with the children themselves in tow because shops were checking. The children, many of whom had never seen a banana, didn't understand what they were waiting for. And the mothers, who remembered bananas from before. The war, who'd eaten them casually without thinking about it, now stood in the freezing cold for hours to give their children that experience. That's post-war Britain in a single image. A mother standing in the cold at dawn with her child's ration book, waiting for a piece of fruit. When you finally reached the front of the queue, and when the greengrocer finally placed that single banana in your hand, the feeling was extraordinary. It was yellow, properly yellow, bright and cheerful, in a world that had been grey for so long, and it smelled utterly foreign. Unlike anything else available in Britain in 1946, you'd carry it home carefully, this precious thing, protecting it from the cold, from being bumped or bruised, and to the memorable moment when you present it to your child, because when British children finally got their hands on real bananas after years of eating mock banana, many of them didn't know what to do with them. They'd been given a strange yellow object and told it was food, but it didn't look like any food they recognized. Some children tried to eat it, biting into the thick peel and immediately recoiling at the bitter, waxy taste. Parents had to intervene, demonstrating the peeling process, showing how you pinched the stem and pulled the skin back in strips to reveal the soft white flesh inside. And the children would watch, fascinated, as their parents performed this ritual, revealing what looked like pale, soft food that didn't look particularly appetizing but smelled wonderful. Some were hesitant, suspicious even. They'd been tricked before. Mock banana had taught them that what adults called treats might not live up to the hype. But eventually, encouraged by parents who were living vicariously through them, they'd take a bite. The reactions were mixed, which surprises people now, but makes perfect sense when you think about it. British children in 1946 had grown up on a diet of bread, potatoes, cabbage, and the occasional bit of meat if you were lucky. Everything was bland, dry, and overcooked. The real tropical flavor was alien. For some children, that first bite of banana was a revelation, the most delicious thing they'd ever tasted. Sweet and soft and exotic, a taste of a world beyond the rubble and rationing, but for others, bananas were disappointing. The texture was too soft, too mushy, especially compared to the crisp apples or firm carrots they were used to. The sweetness was overwhelming, almost cloying, and too rich for palates accustomed to bland wartime food. Some children took one bite, made a face, and refused to finish it, much to their parents' horror and frustration. But the child would shake their head, push it away, and say they didn't like it. And then there were the children who'd grown up genuinely believing that mock banana was what bananas actually tasted like. When they bit into a real banana, they were confused, sometimes even upset. Parents had to explain and admit that the mock banana had been fake, an imitation, and this soft, sweet thing was the real version. Some children accepted this. Others felt betrayed in a small but real way, their trust in adult authorities slightly shaken. Stories circulated of children who used bananas as toys because they didn't understand they were food. A banana's shape lends itself to imaginative play. It looks like a telephone receiver, like a gun, like a boomerang. There are accounts of children playing with bananas until they went black and had to be thrown away, having never tasted them, while their parents watched in horror at the waste. In a world where food waste was practically criminal, watching a child turn a banana into a toy was almost physically painful for adults. But most children did eat them and did immediately want more. But even after the first shipment, bananas remained scarce for months, years even. More ships came, more fruit arrived, but demand far outstripped supply. The queues continued through 1946 into 1947. The ration system stayed in place. One banana per child per week, if you were lucky, if your local shop got a delivery, and if you managed to queue early enough. Rationing didn't end quickly. It was years into the 1950s before all restrictions were finally lifted. Sugar, meat, and butter all remained rationed long after the war ended because Britain was broke, the economy was devastated, and the infrastructure was in ruins. But the bananas' return in 1945 to 1946 gave people hope. For the generation that queued in the cold for those bananas, the memory stayed vivid for the rest of their lives. 70, 80 years later, elderly people would recall standing outside greengrocers at dawn, the weight of a ration book in their hand, the smell when they first opened the brown paper bag, the taste of that first bite. So yes, Britain queued for bananas. We stood in the cold for hours, presented ration books like official documents, and carried home single pieces of fruit like they were treasures. We taught our children how to peel them, watched their faces as they tasted something genuinely new, and felt a complicated mixture of joy and sadness. And for years afterward, even when bananas became commonplace again, cheap and available in every shop, there were people who couldn't eat one without remembering the queue, the cold, the wait, and the moment when grey Britain got just a little bit brighter, a little bit sweeter, a little bit more hopeful. The return of the banana was the first sign that the war was truly ending, that life was moving forward. It was a taste of a world beyond the rubble, beyond rationing, beyond making do with parsnips and calling them exotic fruit. And for the generation that lived through it, that taste was unforgettable. Now, tell us if you remember your first banana. Was it worth the wait, or did you prefer the mock version your mum made? Did you try to eat it with the skin on? And did you queue for hours in the cold? Share your memories below.